Texas is not a battleground state, so what brought both presidential candidates here in the crucial crunch time of the campaign? We dig deeper into what's driving the push to reach voters in the Lone Star State as we move closer to Election Day. Texas voters could decide who controls Congress. We'll look closer at the battles on the ballot in South Texas and the stakes that reach far beyond the state.
I am 100% convinced that we're facing a miscarriage of justice here.
A dramatic showdown at the Capitol as a bipartisan group of lawmakers works to save the life of a death row inmate. But this case is now more than guilt or innocence, how it's fueling questions over the balance of power in Texas.
Produced from the Capitol in Austin and airing statewide, this is the award-winning State of Texas.
Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Hinkle. Both major presidential candidates came to Texas on Friday, visiting the state on the same day, just over a week before Election Day. It's something Texas voters haven't seen for a long time. Donald Trump arrived in Austin early Friday afternoon. Among those welcoming him, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and Senator Ted Cruz. Trump held a news conference at the airport focused on border security. After the news conference, Trump sat for an interview with Joe Rogan. Rogan hosts the country's most popular podcast with more than 14 million followers on Spotify. Kamala Harris scheduled a podcast appearance of her own, speaking with Brene Brown. Brown's podcast also has an audience in the millions, mostly women. Afterwards, Harris rallied in Houston talking about abortion restrictions in Texas and how the outcome of the election could decide whether similar policies spread to other states. Harris's rally also featured an appearance by Texas native Beyonce, giving some star power to her stop in the Lone Star State. The dueling visits come on the heels of a new poll in the race for president in Texas. Emerson College and The Hill polled more than 800 likely voters. 53% put their support behind former President Trump. 46% are supporting Vice President Harris. 2% are either undecided or plan to vote for a third party. We want to get some insight into the significance of the presidential candidates coming to Texas. For that, we turn to Brandon Rottinghouse, the professor of political science at the University of Houston. Welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we know that the presidential race will be decided in a handful of battleground states. Texas is not one of those states, at least from what I've heard. So why would both Harris and Trump come to Texas with just over a week to go before Election Day?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there are a couple of reasons. The first is that we see the national political map really changing. It has moved from being a contest about who can win the Rust Belt or the Blue Wall to being a contest about who can win the Sun Belt states. So places like Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, even Texas now are going to be potentially in play as you see more people moving to the states and the demographics are changing as a result.
So Trump put an emphasis on border security during his appearance in Austin. Abortion rights is a focal point for Harris. Texas seems to give distinct opportunities for both candidates to highlight those campaign issues, right?
You're exactly right. And, Democrats have been waiting for this moment for a long time. This is a moment where you've got a presidential year, so you're going to get high turnout. It's a favorable issue environment for them, especially in reproductive freedoms. And you've got a uniquely kind of unpopular opponent in Ted Cruz, and Donald Trump is a motivator for Democrats. So both campaigns definitely have a lot at stake. And Harris coming here is a way for her to kind of nationalize the race. Like you said, maybe it's the case that Texas isn't exactly in play, but this does a couple of things for the Democrats here in Texas. I think number one, it gives her a chance to have a kind of national profile. The kind of counter programming that requires her to come to Texas and have kind of a national storyline out of it is really going to resonate across the country. It helps Texas Democrats, obviously. The turnout so far has been kind of lackluster, so they're hoping that maybe to get that boost. And frankly, specifically in places like Harris County here in Houston, they need to have big turnout. They're lagging behind where O'Rourke was in 2018. And so they really would love to see those numbers bump up.
So polls show the race for president is not close in Texas, but the race for Senate is tight. What does the Trump visit mean for Ted Cruz and the Harris rally for Colin Allred?
Yeah, Cruz is really, I think, struggling when he's saying that the national Republicans aren't helping him. He's talking about the kind of ability for Democrats to be able to turn out voters in big numbers. I think he's genuine in this. He's got to get big turnout from rural areas. He needs Republicans to come vote. His problem is that he runs behind Donald Trump in terms of polling. His favorability numbers are lower than Donald Trump. And so he's got to really kind of hitch on to Donald Trump's popularity here. You mentioned the border issue. That's another big one that really motivates Republicans to vote. So this is an opportunity for Republicans to really right the ship here and try to stem the tide that might have Democrats turning out in bigger numbers.
We saw some Republican state House candidates appear at Trump's event in Austin. Similar situation with Democrats in Houston for Harris. Do these visits have potential to make a difference in a down ballot race, or have voters already made up their minds in a case like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the reason that Harris is coming here in particular is that Texas has been the battleground for so many conservative policies, especially on reproductive freedoms. You could throw in elections, you could throw in transgender issues. This is definitely a place where the fight will be in the future. So the down ballot Democrats, down ballot Republicans have been fighting this out for a couple of cycles now. A couple of sessions have gone by where you've seen them really go kind of sword for sword. So this is definitely a moment where those down ballot Republicans and Democrats are looking for an amplification of that fight. Remember when the Democrats fled the state and went to D.C. for some cover after voting rights fights? That was something that was clearly calculated to provide some national cover for what they were up to. So it's no surprise that those Democrats and Republicans are trying to find a way to make this fight national.
All right, Brandon Rottinghouse with the University of Houston. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Josh.
In the razor-tight race for U.S. Senate, Ted Cruz and Colin Allred are flexing their bipartisan credentials. Both are touting endorsements from the other party, hoping to get some voters to cross over. Our Ryan Chandler spoke with two influential politicians, a Republican and a Democrat, who have both decided to endorse the candidate from the other party.
I am a Texan and I'm an American long before I'm a Republican.
Glenn Whitley spent nearly 3 decades on the Tarrant County Commissioner's Court, all of them as a conservative Republican. But this year, he says Ted Cruz has to go.
And I think the straw that, for me, broke the camel's back was the insurrection on January the 6th.
Tarrant County is perhaps the most competitive in Texas politics. Whitley says Tarrant County voters look at principle, not party.
It's about the character. I believe that this race for our Senate seat is one that people are going to look at Colin Allred and say he is that moderate in the middle.
Down in the Rio Grande Valley, longtime state senator Eddie Lucio is a kingpin of South Texas politics. A Democrat in the Texas Senate for 32 years. He's all for Ted Cruz.
I know that with him, we're going to have someone that will protect the unborn.
Lucio has long been a conservative Catholic Democrat, often bucking his party on the critical issue of abortion. But he also points to Cruz's more bipartisan achievements.
And the Texas economy is important, and especially there. I know that Senator Cruz was called upon to work on some permits for international bridges, a couple in the Raider area, one in El Paso and one in Brownsville. And he did that effectively by proposing legislation that got bipartisan support.
A new Nexstar poll from The Hill and Emerson College reports only 5% of likely voters are undecided. But that could make a difference, with this poll showing a 1-point race. Ryan Chandler, State of Texas.
While the races for Senate and President are top of mind, there are also important races to watch in South Texas. We'll look at the decisions facing voters that could decide who controls Congress. A life or death battle intensifying at the Texas Capitol. How a fight to change the fate of a death row inmate is raising questions beyond guilt or innocence. The race for Senate and, of course, the race for President are the marquee races for Texas voters, but it's also worth watching a few key races in South Texas. The outcome in 2 U.S. House races could play an important part in determining whether Democrats or Republicans take the majority in Congress. Joining us to talk about a couple of the most competitive races is Sandra Sanchez with Border Report. Welcome, Sandra.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, Let's begin by discussing the race for the 15th Congressional District. The boundaries stretch from east of San Antonio south to McAllen. There's a rematch happening from the 2022 midterm election. Talk to us about the leading candidates there.
Yeah, repeat and rematch are the big words down here. Exactly. Congressional District 15 is huge. It's over 4 hours if you were to drive it from south to north. And we have freshman incumbent Republican Congresswoman Monica de la Cruz. She is being challenged once again by small businesswoman Michelle Vallejo, who is from McAllen. Michelle's family operates a pulga or flea market down here. She's very well known, and she lost in 2022 by about 8 points. And she is challenging Monica once again, de la Cruz, for the seat.
You know, we covered this whole race back in 2022 when De La Cruz won. What changed this time around for the candidates?
Yeah, you know, this actually, there has been redistricting that happened. It's very interesting. In this district in 2020, Biden won by 1.9%, but the Texas legislature changed the course of this district, which caused a congressman to bump to the next district. We'll talk about that in a minute. But had this district been in this way, marked this way in 2020, Trump would have actually won the district by 2.8%. So the district leans more conservative, and Congresswoman de la Cruz has a stronghold definitely to the north of where I am in the ranchlands of Brooks County and those counties heading north to Atascosa, and she's very popular there. Michelle Vallejo, her base had been here in McAllen in South Texas, but this summer she kind of changed her tactics. She went a little bit more center right in discussing issues regarding the border and border security.
You know, there's another rematch happening in the race for the 34th Congressional District, as you alluded to earlier, which is also in South Texas. Democrat Vicente Gonzalez is defending his seat against former Republican Congresswoman Maya Flores. What issues are at play in that race?
Yeah, really fascinating because both were in Congress. Mayra Flores, as you know, was the first Mexican-born Latina ever elected to the United States Congress. She held the seat for about 5 months. It was a special election. She was convinced she was going to win, and then she did not. She lost. And she was very upset. She took to Twitter telling people after her loss, you know, it's your fault. You didn't vote. You should have lost. She actually lost by 8 percentage points. And she's running hard. She's running strong. She is again against sitting Congressman Vicente Gonzalez, who used to be in District 15, who would have faced Monica de la Cruz. Now, the issues of most importance in Congressional District 34, which spans from the Gulf of Mexico, Brownsville, into a small sliver of McAllen, including Congressman Gonzalez's home, include what reflect national issues that are most important to voters right now: the economy, inflation, but border security. Mayra Flores is the wife of a Border Patrol agent. She is very pro-law enforcement. She is backed by President Trump. She says she believes in deportations, and she believes in stricter asylum regulations and border policies. She would vote to re-implement the Remain in Mexico policy, for instance, the Migrant Protection Protocols policy that required migrants to stay south of the border. And she believes in much tougher border policies.
All right. Thank you for the insight. Sandra Sanchez with Border Report. Appreciate you being with us. A bipartisan group of lawmakers makes new moves to save the life of a death row inmate. But this case is now raising questions that go beyond guilt or innocence and fueling conflict at the Capitol. After a deadly car crash into an Austin emergency room, there's new work to save lives. See how our investigation is prompting a Texas senator to take a look at changing policies across the state. A dramatic showdown at the Capitol as a bipartisan group of lawmakers works to save the life of Robert Robertson. Unprecedented legal maneuvers by those House members led the Texas Supreme Court to put Robertson's execution on hold. Robertson's supporters believe his 2003 conviction for the death of his 2-year-old daughter was based on shaken baby syndrome, which is now considered outdated science. They believe he deserves a new trial, but this case has become bigger than Robertson's guilt or innocence. Now it's fueling deep constitutional questions as the governor fights with the legislature over whose power prevails and maybe who lives and who dies.
Texas leaders clashing with Robert Robertson's life on the line.
You get your hopes up and then you get your hopes down to get your hopes up. I mean, whenever they were fighting Thursday night.
Robertson's brother joining protesters crowding a historic hearing, but the star witness still in solitary.
It's especially egregious when there's so much doubt about the guilt of the person involved.
Governor Abbott and Attorney General Paxton are trying to invalidate the legislature's subpoena and block Robertson's testimony. Abbott telling the Texas Supreme Court the House stepped out of line. Only he can extend a death row inmate's life. Robertson's team fought till the last minute to get him to Austin.
Well, fundamentally, that's the purpose of a subpoena, is for a person to physically be present and be assessed for their credibility.
The impasse triggering fundamental questions of the separation of powers.
There are dramatic ways that we could enforce that subpoena, but we didn't issue the subpoena to create a constitutional crisis. And we aren't interested in escalating a division between branches of government.
The committee instead leaning on celebrity power.
I am 100% convinced that we're facing a miscarriage of justice here.
The courts so far silent, and Robertson still on death row.
I think the fact this is blowing up into a bigger civics lesson and a tug of war about who has power, when really it should just be about, were we about to execute an innocent man? But it's a good thing. It's a healthy thing.
Ryan Chandler, State of Texas.
The committee heard from another celebrity witness. Author John Grisham underscored the need for modern scientific standards in criminal trials. He referenced the focus on shaken baby syndrome in the death of Robertson's daughter, Nikki, science that has since been discredited. Later in the hearing, the committee heard from Terry Compton. She was a juror in Robertson's case. Compton testified that shaken baby syndrome was the primary basis for his conviction. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton says the effort by state lawmakers to get a death row inmate a new trial is, quote, based on lies. Paxton posted information from the trial record on social media. He said evidence shows Robertson had a history of abusing his daughter. The Attorney General's office also released an autopsy report from Robertson's original trial. It states the girl's death was due to blunt force trauma. Chairman Joe Moody noted that the information Paxton released contradicted testimony lawmakers heard from lawyers, a juror, and a lead investigator in Robertson's case. Moody maintains that Robertson deserves a new trial. This story is still developing. Committee members say they still want to hear from Robertson himself and could travel to death row to meet with him. However, the Texas Supreme Court is weighing whether to toss out the subpoena that would allow the committee to hear from Robertson. The decision is expected next month. After a deadly car crash into an Austin emergency room, city leaders are working to make hospitals safer. Now, see how our investigation is prompting a Texas senator to take a broader look across the state. After a deadly crash earlier this year at an Austin emergency room, a state senator is now looking at ways to make Texas hospitals safer. Investigator Matt Grant's reporting has already sparked a proposed code change in Austin. Now even broader change could be in the works.
Nearly 8 months to the day after a drunk driver drove her car into St. David's North Austin Medical Center, killing herself and seriously injuring 5, including the Bernard family.
I was thinking, okay, so this is what dying feels like.
State Senator Royce West has a message.
Re-emphasize to the Bernard family, what happened to you was a tragedy, and it shouldn't happen again in the state of Texas. And I'm going to do everything I can within my power to make sure it doesn't happen again.
The Dallas Democrat taking notice of KXAN's investigations, which found more than 300 similar crashes across the country in the past decade.
So all of that's taken into consideration, but that particular number is alarming.
Earlier this year, we traveled to Texas A&M's Transportation Institute near College Station to see how crash-rated security barriers, called bollards, can stop a speeding car. After the crash in Austin and during our investigation, St. David's installed a dozen bollards. While experts say these devices save lives, we found no local, state, or federal requirement for critical infrastructure, like hospitals, to have them, even though medical facilities carry extra risk, with patients in distress driving right up to the entrance.
Do you think hospitals should be required to install crash-rated security bollards?
You know, given what happened to the Bernard family, we need to really look at that particular issue.
Thank you to KXAN's.
Also looking at this issue, the Austin City Council, which will vote on whether to require bollards at new hospitals in December. I asked West if he wants to see a statewide standard.
We'll sit down with the hospitals and kind of get their take on exactly how we go about tackling and resolving this particular problem.
Something you're committed to looking
I'm
into?
committed to it, right.
He's also committed to meeting with the Bernard family during the legislative session, saying what happened here should concern all lawmakers.
You do a cost-benefit analysis, life over a few dollars. And you know where I'm going to come down on that. I think life is more important than a few dollars.
Senator West says he wants to meet with hospital officials and research what other states have done. We checked and found in 2022, California updated its law to allow insurance discounts for businesses that install bollards, and at least 5 cities passed local rules requiring them, 3 sparked by deadly accidents. At the Capitol, Matt Grant, State of Texas.
Our investigation also sparked a bollard review at all federal facilities in the Southwest. Congressman Lloyd Doggett's office asked the General Services Administration to look into this following our reporting. That review is ongoing. You can catch up on Matt's entire series on our website. Just look for the Preventing Disaster links in this week's State of Texas story. Thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle, and we'll be back next week to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics.